Last Tuesday I was working late. Again. Shocking, I know. I've been pulling these insane hours trying to finish quarterly reports, and I completely lost track of time. Next thing I know, it's almost midnight, and I'm the only person left in the office building. The security guard had already done his round, so it was just me and the elevators humming in the background. I finally packed up and headed down to the parking garage. Now, I should mention that I've always been kind of anxious, especially late at night. My brain loves to turn every shadow into a serial killer, and every weird sound into imminent doom. I know this about myself, and I've learned to recognize when my imagination is just running wild, because there's never actually anything there. It's always just my stupid brain playing tricks on me. So I'm walking through this concrete tomb of a garage, and my heels are echoing like crazy. Every step sounds like gunshots bouncing off the walls. The fluorescent lights are doing that flickering thing and making this awful buzzing noise. I'm already giving myself the creeps just from the atmosphere. My car is parked way in the back because I got to work late that morning and all the good spots were taken. I'm walking toward it, digging around in my purse for my keys like an idiot, because of course they somehow migrated to the very bottom, underneath all my random crap. I've got my head down, still walking, fishing around past lip gloss and receipts and whatever else I've thrown in there. I find my keys and look up, feeling relieved that I can finally get out of this place. And there are two kids standing right next to my car. I swear to God they weren't there before. I just looked at my car maybe 10 seconds earlier, and it was completely alone. There was nobody around. The whole garage was empty. But now there are these two small figures just standing there by my driver's side door like they'd materialized out of nowhere. My heart skipped a beat. Like I said, I make myself anxious. But then to see these two kids out of nowhere startled me. I stopped dead in my tracks, probably looking like a deer in headlights. They were small, definitely kids, maybe 8 or 10 years old. They looked normal enough. They were wearing jeans, sneakers, and a dark hoodie. They seemed clean and well dressed, not like homeless kids or runaways. But that made it more confusing to what they were doing in a corporate parking garage at midnight. I managed to find my voice and said, "Can I help you?" I got no response. They just stood there like statues. Both of them had their hoodies pulled up so I couldn't really see their faces. And neither one was looking in my direction. It was weird as hell. I tried again, louder this time. "Are you kids okay? Are you lost?" The one closer to me, I think it was a girl based on her size and build, finally turned toward me but kept her head down so I still couldn't see her face properly. "We need a ride," she said. Something about her voice immediately put me on edge. It was too flat and emotionless, like someone reading a grocery list. Kids don't talk like that. "A ride where?" I asked, but I was already taking a step back without really thinking about it. They didn't answer. The second kid, maybe a boy, didn't move at all. I was starting to get annoyed on top of being freaked out. I mean, I was already jumpy from being alone in this garage, and now these kids were playing some kind of weird game instead of just telling me what they needed. "Look, I need to know where you want to go, or I can call the police to help you if you'd feel safer with them," I said, pulling out my phone. "We want to ride out of town," the girl said. That was a weird response. I can't think of any 10-year-old that would ask a stranger for a ride out of town at midnight. That's not normal kid behavior. That's not normal anyone behavior. "I'm not going to do that," I said, starting to dial the non-emergency police line. "Can we sit in your car for a while?" That made even less sense than the first request. I was about to finish dialing when the girl suddenly stepped forward and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was way stronger than it should have been for such a small kid. "Please, just for a ride. Just for a little while," she said. That's when I knew something was really wrong. Her voice still had that weird artificial quality, like it was coming from a broken speaker. But when she grabbed me and looked up slightly, I caught a glimpse under her hood. Now, this could have been the shadows playing tricks. It could have been the crappy fluorescent lighting making things look weird. Could have been a lot of things. But I swear, her eyes looked completely black. Not just dark brown or dilated pupils, but solid black like someone had colored them in with a Sharpie. I yanked my hand away and stumbled backward. That's when I realized both kids had moved closer without me noticing. Even though they were tiny, something about them made me feel trapped. I was feeling claustrophobic and like I needed to get away from them, fast. "Please," the girl said again in that horrible flat voice. "We need a ride." I just wanted them to back off so I could get to my car. "Okay," I said quickly. "Just let me get to my car." They stepped aside at exactly the same time, like they were synchronized. I edged toward my Honda, keeping my back to the concrete pillar, key ready in my hand. I unlocked just the driver's door, not the whole car, and slipped inside as fast as I could. Immediately, I locked the door behind me and started the engine. And as I was backing out, I heard them trying the back door handles. I was able to get away and not run them over, thank goodness. Not that I wanted to hurt them, but I couldn't be there any longer. Something oppressive about them really got to me. In my rearview mirror, I could see them standing exactly where I'd left them, just watching me drive away with their shadowed faces. I got out of that garage so fast I probably left tire marks on the ramp. Once I was on street level, I pulled over and called the police. I told them I'd seen some kids alone in the parking garage who might need help, but I kept it vague. I didn't mention the weird conversation or what I thought I saw under the hood. I've been thinking about it all week, and I keep going back and forth. I know the difference between my anxiety and reality. I mean, I've been scaring myself in parking garages for years, and nothing was ever actually there. But this was different. It was there and in my face. I don't know what those kids' deal was. Maybe they were just really lost and I overreacted because I was already on edge. Maybe they got the help they needed. But something about the whole thing still gives me chills when I think about it. Those voices, the way they moved, and especially what I saw, or thought I saw, under that hood. Has anyone else ever experienced something like this? Please tell me I'm not losing my mind. Memorial Day weekend, 2003. I was 23, still living in upstate New York, working a job I hated and drinking too much. Back then, I used to escape to the mountains whenever I could. The solitude made me feel like I had some control over my life. There's a spot about an hour and a half north of where I grew up, a long-forgotten state trail that winds up through second-growth forest and ends on an old fire road. And I'd been there a few times before and knew I could set up my tent near a creek crossing where no one ever went. I had a 3-day weekend and no obligations, so I threw my pack in the car Friday afternoon and drove up. By the time I got there, it was cooling off. Up in the hills, the air always feels thinner, and that late spring chill was already creeping in under the trees. I didn't mind it though. I liked the smell of wet pine needles and cold earth. One thing I liked about this spot was I could drive up an old spider trail, pull off a little ways, park and pitch my tent. I didn't have to lug gear through the woods. That first evening, I decided to stretch my legs on the main trail before dark. The light had gone flat, that gray colorless hour before sunset, and I had the path to myself, or at least I thought so, until I saw someone moving parallel to me about 100 yards off, deeper in the trees. They were going the same direction, a figure in muted clothes, and not in a hurry. I figured it was just another hiker cutting cross country. I called out, just a "hey there," but they didn't react. They kept walking, slow and stiff, like someone wearing a heavy pack. I kept hiking, telling myself they probably couldn't hear me. But the odd thing was, no matter how the trail curved, the other person stayed more or less level with me, keeping pace through terrain that should have slowed anyone down. Another half hour went by. The woods were getting darker, and when I glanced over again, the figure was closer, maybe 50 yards now. And something about the way they moved finally sank in. Both legs swung in a weird, rigid way, like they were in splints. Their arms didn't seem to swing at all. Even from a distance, their joints looked all out of sorts, bent like elbows and knees that didn't quite line up. I called out again, "Hey, you okay over there?" No answer. I veered off the trail, stepping over brush to try and cut toward them. As soon as I did, they changed direction too, keeping the same distance, always slipping between the trunks just far enough away. That's when I felt the first twinge of unease. It wasn't that they were deformed. It was the way they reacted. They didn't run. They didn't come closer. They maintained the exact gap. It was getting dark fast. I decided whoever they were, they clearly didn't want help, and I'd be better off back at camp. I made a mental note of where I'd seen them and turned back. That night, I woke up to a noise I can't properly describe. It was a scream, but also like a sobbing moan, high then low, rising and falling. It came from somewhere near the edge of my camp. My first thought was that the guy from earlier had hurt himself. I grabbed my flashlight, fumbling with the switch, and before I could get it on, I heard movement. Something running through the brush only 10 feet from the tent. When the beam finally cut through the dark, I spun around. All I caught was a glimpse of a shape retreating between the trees, fast. But in that flash, I saw the same crooked limbs from earlier. Long, bent wrong, moving at a speed that didn't add up for how twisted they were. I stood there shaking, flashlight in one hand, the other hovering near the little .38 I kept in my bag. Eventually, the woods went quiet again. I sat awake a long time, listening, but nothing else happened. Most people would have packed up at dawn and left. I probably should have. But back then, I was obsessed with weird stuff. This was the first time I'd seen something unexplainable in person, and my curiosity overrode my sense. At first light, I loaded a small day pack with food, water, and set out to look for tracks. I spent all morning combing the hillside above and below the trail where I'd seen it. There were no footprints, no scat, not even a broken twig. Just a couple of old deer paths that looked like they hadn't been used in years. That was when I realized something else. Usually the woods up there are alive with sound. Squirrels skittering, chickadees, woodpeckers, chipmunks. But that whole morning it was dead quiet. No calls, no rustle of undergrowth. And thinking back, it had been the same thing the evening before. By midday, my enthusiasm had cooled, and the silence started to get under my skin. I hiked back to camp to grab the pistol and sat for a while, trying to decide if I was being stupid. In the end, I told myself I'd cover the western ridge I hadn't hit yet, then I'd call it quits. I stayed out all afternoon, Around sunset, when the light was turning gold, I caught sight of something ahead of me on a distant rise. A person-shaped figure, still as a tree. I moved closer, slowly, keeping my eyes on it. I closed the gap to maybe 100 feet before it started to keep the distance between us, just like it had the day before. I wish I'd brought binoculars or at least the scope for my rifle back home. All I had was the pistol and the growing certainty that I was out of my depth. The sun slipped below the ridge and shadows pulled fast. I hadn't planned on staying out past dark and hadn't brought my light. I turned back toward camp, moving quick but careful. That's when I realized the thing was following me now. I could hear it in the brush behind me, keeping pace the way it had before, only this time I was the one being shadowed. I sped up, and so did it. The footsteps got closer. They were 50 feet behind me, maybe a little bit more. It was completely dark now. I wasn't worried about getting lost, since the trail I was on led back to camp. I was, however, worried about tripping on a root and twisting my ankle. The footsteps were getting closer, and I didn't want to risk that thing catching up to me. I broke into a run. I ran the entire mile back to my campsite, heart hammering, pistol in my hand. The footsteps never fell back. When I reached the clearing, I spun around, raised the gun, and shouted that I'd shoot. The footsteps stopped, dead quiet. I couldn't see a thing beyond the first ring of trees. Keeping the pistol up, I backed toward my tent, unzipped it one-handed, and reached for my flashlight. I had to bend over to reach my light, so I couldn't keep my eyes up. As soon as my fingers closed on it, I heard movement circling behind me. I clicked the light on and swung it around. And just for a second, I caught it in the beam. A human shape darting away between the trunks. Its run was a jerky, wrong-angled lurch, arms and legs bent like a broken marionette. Then it was gone. I didn't shoot. I couldn't bring myself to fire at something fleeing, no matter how freakish it looked. Instead, I packed my gear in record time, threw it all in my truck, and started down the mountain in the dark. About 5 miles down the mountain, I rolled the window down to catch my breath. The night sounds were back. Crickets and a far-off owl. Normal wood sounds. I've told this story a few times over the years, but I've never found anything that matches it. Not Bigfoot, not skinwalkers, not any cryptid I've read about. I call it the Crooked One, for lack of a better name. And all I know is what I saw. For context, I started hunting when I was in my mid-30s. I had been looking for something new to do with my weekends, something to get me outdoors more, and a buddy of mine convinced me to give it a try. Been at it for several seasons now, and I'm pretty comfortable in the field. I usually hunt with a group of friends. It makes it more fun, and honestly safer when you're dealing with firearms in rough terrain. This particular weekend was late in the season, November, I think. Most of my usual hunting crew had already filled their tags earlier in the month, but I'd had some bad luck and hadn't bagged anything yet. My buddy Jake told me about this spot he'd been to before, said it was a sure thing. Big open field with lots of natural cover, where deer like to hunker down. He drew me a rough map and told me how to get there. I'm usually a blind hunter, like to set up somewhere with good visibility and wait for something to come to me. But this place Jake described was all field country, rolling terrain with washes and gullies cutting through it. The kind of place where you have to get up and move around, try to jump deer out of their hiding spots if you want any action. I got there around 6 in the morning while it was still pretty dark. I always like to get a feel for new territory before I start hunting it proper. The field was massive, probably a couple hundred acres, with these deep trenches carved through it from years of runoff. Perfect spots for deers to get down out of the wind and cold. I checked the wind direction first thing. That's hunting 101. It was coming from the west, so I figured I'd approach from the east side. The whole point is to jump them out and get a clean shot while they're running, not spook them so bad they bolt before you even know they're there. Spent most of the day hiking up and down that rough terrain. It's harder work than it sounds, especially when you're carrying gear and trying to stay quiet at the same time. Those washes are deceptively deep. Some of them drop 8 or 10 feet down, and the sides can be pretty steep. I jumped a couple of does throughout the day, but nothing I could legally tag. Does were out of season, and I'm not the kind of hunter who bends the rules. By late afternoon, I was getting pretty tired and starting to think that Jake had oversold this spot. The sun was getting low, and I was considering calling it a day when I started down into this one particular wash that was deeper than most of the others. It stretched out for maybe 200 yards in a straight line, like a natural trench carved right through the field. I was about halfway down the slope when I saw movement at the far end. My heart jumped because after a whole day of nothing, here was finally some action. I could tell right away it was a buck, good size too, from what I could see at that distance. Maybe 100 yards down the wash from where I was standing. Not a difficult shot for someone with my experience. I brought my rifle up and looked through the scope to get a better view. That's when I saw something that made my knees go weak. It was definitely a buck, but something was horribly wrong with it. The antlers were huge, but they weren't shaped like any rack I'd ever seen. They were all twisted up and knotted together, like someone had taken normal antlers and braided them into some kind of nightmare sculpture. Figured it had to be some kind of genetic defect. I'd heard of deer with unusual antler growth, though nothing quite like this. But then I noticed the eyes. Even at that distance, even through the scope, I could see them glowing red, not reflecting light the way normal deer eyes do at night, but actually glowing like hot coals. And the face, hell, the face was ghastly. This thing had what I could only describe as fangs, 4 long sharp teeth jutting out of its mouth like some kind of predator. I stood there staring through the scope, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My brain kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was sick. Maybe it had some kind of disease I'd never heard of. But my brain was also screaming that this wasn't right. This wasn't natural. I must have hesitated too long because the thing suddenly leaped out of the wash and took off. But it didn't move like a deer at all. Deer bound when they run, that distinctive up and down motion where they push off with their hind legs and land on their front legs. And this thing ran like a dog or a big cat, low to the ground with this fluid predatory gait. It was faster than any deer I'd ever seen, just a blur moving across the field. By the time I thought to take a shot, it was long gone. I hiked back to my truck feeling shaken, kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to convince myself I'd imagined some of it, or that the distance and lighting had played tricks on me. But I know what I saw through that scope. A few weeks later, I was having beers with my hunting group, and I finally worked up the nerve to tell Jake about it. Described the whole thing, the twisted antlers, the glowing eyes, those fangs, the way it moved when it ran. Jake went completely quiet. He stared at his beer for a long time before he looked up at me and said, "We don't speak of that, ever." When I asked him for more information, he just shook his head and changed the subject. Wouldn't say another word about it. I've done some research since then, trying to find some explanation for what I saw. I looked into diseases that might affect deer, genetic disorders, anything that might account for those twisted antlers and predatory teeth. Never found anything that fully matched. Eventually, I stumbled across stories about knot deer online and figured that was probably the closest thing to what I encountered out there. I still don't really know what to make of it, but I know I'll never forget what I saw through that scope. I moved out to the Midwest in the early 2000s, renting an old farmhouse about a half an hour from town. It was the perfect place to work on my writing and take things easy for a while. It had been empty for years, sitting there with its peeling paint, sagging porch, and creaking floors. The kind of place you can't help but notice smells like dust and damp wood, even before stepping inside. I liked it though because it offered quiet, solitude, and somewhere I could actually think without sirens or traffic, or the constant hum of city life. The first week I was there, I noticed noises at night. I ignored them at first. Floors groaned under the house's own weight, doors clicked, and the walls sighed as the temperature dropped. I'd grown up in apartments. I wasn't used to houses that could breathe on their own. I chalked it up to that, telling myself it was just the place settling. But after a few nights, something else crept in, faint scratching at the back door. The first 2 nights I brushed it off, figured it was raccoons, or maybe a stray cat. Out here, wildlife was a part of life, but it unsettled me more than I expected. I'd never lived alone in the country, and the quiet that felt comforting in the day felt hollow and heavy at night. Then came the 3rd night. I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up, rattling the loose shutters, and my head felt tight with unease. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen for a glass of milk. Halfway through pouring, I heard it again, that scratching at the back door. But there was something else this time. A sound I couldn't ignore. A deep sniffing, like a dog sniffing, but much bigger. I froze, glass in hand. It reminded me of my dog when I was a kid, that sloppy Labrador mix, but the sound was deeper and more wet. Whoever or whatever it was had to be massive to produce a sound like that. I abandoned the milk and crept quietly up the stairs to my bedroom. My window looked out over the backyard. I pressed my face to the glass, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. I wasn't. Below me, illuminated by the pale moonlight, was a black dog. It was huge, easily the size of a small bear. Okay, maybe not quite a bear, but far larger than any dog I'd ever seen. Its coat was glossy and dark, melting into the shadows of the yard. Its paws thudded softly on the earth as it circled the back door, sniffing, pausing, testing the wood with a massive head. And I swear it could have ripped the door off its hinges if it wanted to. Then, without warning, it bolted into the woods behind the house. I stayed pressed to the window, waiting to see if it would return. The silence that followed was deeper than the usual night sounds. Or maybe I was just listening harder than I would usually. I eventually climbed back into bed, shaking and restless. Sleep came late, fragmented by dreams I can't recall clearly now. A month passed, and life returned to my normal routine. I worked days, fixed things around the house, and tried to forget what I had seen. Then one night, I was returning from dinner with friends I'd just started seeing. The farmhouse sits at the end of a long driveway, half a mile from the road, flanked by wheat fields on one side. I drove slowly, eyes flickering across the golden stalks swaying in the wind. And that's when I saw it again. At the edge of the wheat field, silhouetted by the faint glow of the road behind me, the black dog waited. Even at that distance, it made me shiver. Its eyes were red and glowing. Its teeth were bared, Froth dripped from its mouth. It cast an ominous presence around me. I eased the car backward, my palms slick with sweat, and decided to spend the night in a hotel. I didn't dare drive past it. Didn't even consider trying to get closer. I called the police the next day, mostly as a nervous habit, and they found nothing. No prints, no disturbances, just the usual rural quiet. I never saw it again, but a week later, I started feeling ill. I had fatigue, low-grade headaches, and a dull pain I tried to ignore. Eventually, I went to the doctor. Tests revealed early-stage cancer. I spent a year in treatment, chemotherapy, scans, all of it. And it eventually went into remission. No clear cause, no explanation. Just things happen. I've always been skeptical of omens. Black dogs, I'd laugh at them in folklore books. Harbingers of death or misfortune, people called them. I never believed it. But after those nights, the scratching, the sniffing, the red eyes glowing across the wheat field, I'm not so sure anymore. I don't think it was simply a dog. I've been metal detecting for about 15 years now, mostly around old homesteads and battlefields. I'm retired, so I've got the time to really get out there and search for the good stuff. Last month, I was down in Louisiana, checking out this area near Baton Rouge, where I'd heard there might be some Civil War artifacts. Nothing too remote, just a swampy section behind some farmland, where troops supposedly camped during one of their river campaigns. I'd done my research beforehand and got permission from the landowner. He told me there used to be an old logging operation back there too, so I figured even if I didn't find any military stuff, I might turn up some old tools and machinery parts. I brought my hip waders because I knew I'd probably have to get into the water at some point. These Louisiana swamps don't mess around. The morning started off pretty good. Found a few small items right away. An old button, a couple of musket balls, nothing spectacular, but enough to keep me motivated. The swamp was alive that day. Lots of bird calls and insect noises. Normal stuff you'd expect. I've hunted and fished enough to know what regular swamp sounds are like. Around midday, I started hearing something different though. This clicking sound that I couldn't quite place. At first, I figured it was just another bug or maybe a woodpecker, so I ignored it and kept working my grid pattern. Found a few more hits and was feeling pretty optimistic about the spot. But that clicking kept going, and after a while it seemed to be getting louder, more aggressive, I guess you'd say. Like whatever was making it was getting worked up about something. I stopped detecting for a minute and looked around, trying to spot what it was. Didn't see anything unusual, just cypress trees, Spanish moss, the usual swamp scenery. I went back to detecting and got this massive hit on my machine. The kind of signal that makes you think you found something really good. I got down on my knees in the muck and started digging with my folding spade, trying to be careful not to damage whatever was down there. That's when the clicking got really close. Sounded like it was right behind me. I kept digging though because I was so focused on this target. The signal was still screaming in my headphones. Then the clicking moved up right next to my head, almost like whatever it was had come up right beside me. I looked up and there was this beetle sitting about 3 feet away from me. But this thing was massive, easily the size of a raccoon, maybe bigger. It had these huge mandibles, like oversized pincers, that looked like they could crack a walnut without any trouble. The clicking was coming from it, and it was staring right at me with these black compound eyes. I completely freaked out. I swung my spade at it without even thinking, but the metal just glanced right off of its shell with a hollow thunk sound. The thing turned and ran off, faster than I would have thought possible for something that size, crashing through the undergrowth like a small dog. I didn't stick around to see where it went. I packed up my gear as fast as I could and got out of there. Left whatever I'd been digging for right there in the hole. I'd been searching online trying to find anything that matches what I saw. Looked up every big beetle I could think of. Rhinoceros beetles, stag beetles, even tropical species that might have somehow ended up in Louisiana. Nothing even comes close to the size of what I encountered out there. I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't normal. I've been in swamps all over the South and never seen anything like it. Part of me wants to go back and see if I can find it again, but honestly, those mandibles looked like they meant business. I think I'll stick to detecting in open fields for a while.
You have been watching Noir, a Radion production brought to you by Trapper Dan, the finest in canned survival food.